Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Prepare for a pandemic. That's the World Health Organization's dire warning after a sudden spike in coronavirus cases in Europe and the Middle East. What is President Trump doing to protect America? And what impact will the deadly virus have on global economy? Our George Thomas has the latest.
The number of coronavirus cases is increasing exponentially and spreading so fast that scientists fear it could turn into a global pandemic that cannot be stopped. The World Health Organization not ready to declare it a pandemic just yet, but others say we are close and the world should be prepared.
WHO and others don't like to use the word pandemic, but by the classical definition, we're really teetering very, very close.
80,146 people have been infected so far. 2,699 have died, the majority of those in China. And while there are signs the number of new cases and deaths on the mainland are slowing, growing numbers of people are dying outside China. In South Korea, the number of people infected spiked to 977, up 375 from Sunday. 10 people have died there. In Daegu, the epicenter of South Korea's outbreak, city officials going street to street disinfecting the ground. In northern Italy, 12 towns on lockdown with police manning all entry points. 232 cases were registered in the region. 7 people have died. Meanwhile, officials in Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, and Afghanistan scrambling after cases of the deadly virus were reported in those countries. This after 15 people died in one single city in Iran, as health officials there said 61 people across the country tested positive for the infection.
The sudden increase in new cases is certainly very concerning.
All this sending global financial markets into a tailspin. The Dow and S&P posting their biggest drops Monday in over 2 years.
Investors are concerned that this might be moving beyond a containment phase, meaning the outbreak's more serious and more economies are being affected.
Appearing on CBN's Faith Nation, China expert Gordon Chang says American companies that depend on Chinese manufacturing will begin to feel the economic effects of the virus outbreak in a few months.
It's rippling out beyond China because China is a factory floor. So we're having a lot of empty shelves in the near future, especially the big box retailers in the U.S., which keep lean inventories.
The White House seeking an additional $2.5 billion from Congress to fight the coronavirus, as scientists at drug maker Moderna expected to start clinical trials in April on a potential vaccine to combat the infection. George Thomas, CBN News.
Well, you can stay with CBN News for the latest on the coronavirus as we provide updates throughout the day on the CBN News Channel and CBNnews.com. Well, in other news, the president takes a swing at 2 Supreme Court justices after one of them charges her colleagues with bias. Wow. Undreamed of. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington.
Pat, President Trump is calling on 2 Supreme Court justices to recuse themselves from cases involving his administration. In a tweet Monday, he called out Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg over past comments, specifically referring to a recent dissent by Justice Sotomayor, where she charged the High Court of putting a thumb on the scale in favor of Trump administration policies. At a news conference this morning, reporters pressed the president about what he found offensive with Sotomayor's comment.
Her statement was so inappropriate. When you're a justice of the Supreme Court, and it's almost what she's trying to do is take the people that do feel a different way and get them to vote the way that she would like them to vote.
The president making those remarks as he wrapped up a trip to India where he completed a $3 billion weapons sale. He also made progress on a comprehensive trade deal. Some say strengthening the U.S.-India alliance is a strategic move that ultimately, Pat, will weaken China's global influence.
Well, India is a huge country. China both have over 1 billion population. And Prime Minister Modi, it looks like he's more of an economic conservative than some of his past fellows have been. They've been tending a lot more towards socialism. And now He's going for free markets. And what Trump has embraced him and said, look, we're going to be your partner. We're going to have a trade agreement between the two nations, and we're going to sell you $3 billion worth of arms, so we'll be your arms supplier. And as a counterweight to China, I think it was a brilliant move, and we all should applaud. John?
A U.S. appeals court upheld Trump administration rules restricting abortion clinics. The rules forbid clinics that receive federal funds from making abortion referrals and sharing space with abortion providers. San Francisco's Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned lower court rulings in Washington State, Oregon, and California that had struck down the rules. The Ninth Circuit, with a long record of liberal rulings, is shifting under the Trump administration appointees. The president has now, Pat, appointed 10 judges to the circuit.
It's an amazing thing. The 10th Circuit was one of the most overruled circuits in America. It was constantly being overruled at the Supreme Court because of their far-out rulings. And now they've become conservative. And in our home area, the Fourth Circuit, which was known as a very conservative circuit because of Obama appointees, has become more liberal. So you just never know where the law is going to come down. But at the same time, you just pray that somehow we'll get the right number. But Trump has made an amazing change in our judiciary. He's had a huge number of appointments. And there's another one. I think Amy Barrett is probably the one that they're considering to go on the court if one of the justices resigns. But if one of the liberal judges decides to resign, that'll flip the balance of the court rather substantially toward a more, robust view of the First Amendment. John?
Pat, a religious rights case over faith-based adoption and same-sex couples is heading to the Supreme Court. The High Court announced it will hear a challenge to a ruling involving a Philadelphia Catholic group barred from offering foster care for refusing to work with same-sex couples. This after a lower court ruling saying the city's policies did not target the Catholic group for its religious beliefs. Lori Wyndham, senior counsel at Beckett, a nonprofit law firm dedicated to protecting the free expression of all religious traditions, explained on CBN's Faith Nation program what's at stake.
What's especially sad is that we have seen this again and again and across the country. There's an attempt right now to shut down faith-based foster agencies in Michigan. We have actually seen Catholic Social Services close its doors in Boston, in San Francisco, in Illinois, and here in Washington, D.C. If the Supreme Court doesn't step in, and until the Supreme Court steps in, this pattern is just going to continue.
Wyndham noted recent Supreme Court rulings in similar cases have been favorable to religious freedom. Well, Justice Clarence Thomas is the longest-serving justice on the U.S. Supreme Court today. He's also the second African-American confirmed to the court. Yet, as Charlene Aaron explains, he's one example of black conservatives not often celebrated for their accomplishments.
A new documentary about Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas explores his life, his faith, and his path toward conservative ideals. It also highlights his struggles, both within and outside the African-American community.
I will nominate Judge Clarence Thomas to serve as Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court.
Created equal, Clarence Thomas, in his own words, goes back to Thomas's childhood in the segregated South and his transition from a Black Panther to conservative ideals. The film also showcases his contentious Supreme Court nomination.
That's when all heck broke loose.
Judge Thomas began to use work situations to discuss sex.
We know exactly what's going on here. This is the wrong black guy.
Thomas has served as a Supreme Court justice for nearly 3 decades. He's often ignored, however, instead of celebrated for his accomplishments, which include being the second African American on the court. Ken Blackwell of the Family Research Council addressed the issue recently in USA Today, writing, "Don't forget Justice Clarence Thomas in Black History Month celebrations."
In this time where you have to be politically correct, you have to adopt the language and the worldview of the left, Clarence Thomas does none of that. And therefore, he is seen as a clear and present threat to their orthodoxy. And they do whatever they can to either erase his contribution or to totally ignore it.
In the documentary, Thomas shares how he was caught up in racist and often violent demonstrations at one point in his life. Then a spiritual encounter changed his life.
I saw what I had become, lashing out at every single thing. And then I asked God that if you take anger out of my heart, I'll never hate again.
Blackwell says that faith has been a guiding beacon that Thomas brought to the High Court.
Clarence Thomas has come to embrace a notion that it was at the heart of our republic, and that is that our basic freedoms are gifts from God. He understands that, you know, it is the human conscience which is at the heart of our individualism, and protecting the freedom of the human conscience, protecting religious liberty, protecting the centrality of God in the life of our nation is Clarence's gift.
For that reason, Justice Thomas is more than worthy to be honored now and for years to come. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Pat, back to you.
Well, Clarence Thomas came to Regent Law School and gave some lectures. I had a nice long talk with him. He's a marvelous guy. And we were talking about the First Amendment, and, you know, I said, look, the Constitution says Congress shall pass no law respecting an established religion. He said, that's right, it's Congress. And yet, at the same time, they've got laws that restrict states, they've got laws that restrict private groups, and he understood that. So he is a strict constructionist after the manner of Antonin Scalia, but he's just very quiet on the court, but he's a very smart man. But when that Anita Hill came up, as he said, it's a political lynching, but he got through the hearings, and he's been serving for a long time, and we salute a great judge of the Supreme Court, and I hope and pray he stays on for a while and doesn't consider retiring, because he's been an asset to all of us. John?
Pat, to Campaign 2020, the candidates are expected to turn their fire on Democratic Socialist Bernie Sanders in tonight's debate in South Carolina before Saturday's primary. Sanders has pulled just within a few points of South Carolina frontrunner Joe Biden. It's a pivotal state for the former VP, who hopes to shore up, Pat, his faltering campaign.
Well, you know, we're going to have, I asked our producer if he could get me a list of the proposals that Bernie Sanders has made and how much it's going to cost. And we're going to try to get that and have Steve Moore discuss it in a subsequent broadcast. But I think you need to know it's free health care, free this, free that, free the other, free the other. And when Anderson Cooper interviewed him on 60 Minutes, he really couldn't tell you the price tag of a whole lot of these initiatives. So we want to put a figure on it and show it here on this program.